How many of these 33 tricks are you already using? And how many are quietly running against you every time you go out? Most experienced hog hunters have figured out 5 or 6 of these the hard way. The other 27 are the gap between an average season and a consistent one. I have been running hogs on private land in the South for 18 years, and it took me most of that time to collect everything on this list through my own mistakes, through conversations with people who had been doing this longer than I had, and through a lot of camera data that eventually stopped lying to me. The reference script that came with this title touched on wind, feeders, and caliber, and all of that is on the list. But there are 28 others the reference script did not get to, and one of them near the end is the single highest value trick I know for getting a second and third shot off after the first animal goes down. Stick around for that one. Trick 1. Hunt the backside of a cold front. In the 48 hours before a pressure system moves through, hogs feed aggressively. Their atmospheric pressure sensitivity is well documented in multiple wildlife management publications, including research from Texas A and M AgriLife, which has tracked feral hog movement relative to barometric changes on instrumented study areas. The behavioral mechanism is straightforward. Dropping pressure is associated in animals with incoming weather, which historically means a period of reduced feeding opportunity. Pre-front feeding spikes are your window. Plan your hunts around the forecast, not just the calendar. Trick 2. Set up on active rooting sign, not just trails. Fresh rooting, which is the loose churned soil that looks like something drove a garden tiller through it, tells you hogs were in that exact spot within the last 12 to 24 hours. A trail tells you they use a corridor. Rooting tells you they stopped and worked the ground. Stand or blind placement within shooting range of a fresh root site, with wind in your favor, will outperform standing over a trail every time. The root site is where they committed. The trail is just how they got there. Trick 3. Hunt wallows at midday in summer when temperatures push above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly hot enough that you are sweating without moving. Morning thermals are unstable, evening thermals are falling, but from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., the thermal pattern stabilizes and carries your scent predictably. Hogs that have been bedded since early morning come to water and mud to regulate body temperature in that window. Counterintuitive sit time, low hunting pressure, predictable location. The combination produces consistent results on properties where evening feeder sits have gone stale. Trick 4. Place your feeder 40 yards inside the tree line rather than at the field edge. A hog moving from cover toward an open field feeder has to commit to exposed ground to reach the corn. Pressure-educated sounders, the ones that have been shot at or trapped, manage that commitment by shifting arrival time progressively later into the night until the visit is fully nocturnal. Moving the feeder into cover gives the sounder a covered approach and a fast retreat corridor, which shifts the threat calculus in your favor and pulls daylight visits back into legal shooting hours. Trick 5. Use a short hog grunt to freeze a moving sounder. When a group of hogs is moving through at a trot and you do not have a clean shot, one short grunting sound, which you can produce with your mouth or with a simple tube call, will often stop the entire group for 3 to 5 seconds while they process the sound. That pause is your shot window. I have used this dozens of times to stop animals that would otherwise have cleared the shooting lane before I could track and fire. Do not overdo it. One grunt. If they do not stop, they were not going to, and repeated calling alerts them. Trick 6. Hunt creek crossings after rain events. Heavy rain concentrates hog movement at shallow crossing points because hogs avoid deep water and because rain washes away previous scent trails, effectively resetting the behavioral patterns that pressure-educated animals use to avoid your setups. Fresh tracks in the mud on the downstream bank will show you the exact crossing point and the direction of travel, which is more current intelligence than any camera photo from the previous week. Trick 7. Place a second camera 100 yards back on the approach trail rather than only on the feeder. The feeder camera shows you arrivals. The approach camera shows you direction of travel, sounder composition, and exact timing of departure from bedding relative to arrival at the feeder. When those two data points align across multiple nights, you have a confirmed pattern you can intercept. Same principle I covered in the feeder management video. Camera position determines what question you are asking. Feeder camera asks, did they show up? Approach camera asks, where are they coming from and when? Trick 8. Hunt east-facing slopes in the morning as the sun begins heating the terrain. Thermal airflow on sloped terrain moves uphill as sun-warmed air rises off the lower ground. A stand positioned on the upper edge of an east-facing slope in the morning has its scent carried uphill and away from the bedding areas, typically located on the lower, cooler, shaded sections. This is the same thermal principle that elk hunters work by default, and that most hog hunters ignore entirely, because hog hunting is usually marketed as a nighttime feeder sport. On properties with rolling terrain, morning thermal management will put you in position over bedding areas in ways that flat ground feeder hunters never experience. Trick 9. Kill the last animal in the sounder, not the first. The standard mistake is to take the first shot at the first animal that presents a clean opportunity. That first shot scatters the group, and in most cases, the rest of the sounder clears the shooting lane before you can reload and reacquire. If you wait until the trailing animals are within range, and the lead animals are at or past your shooting position, your first shot takes the trailing animal, while the lead animals are still processing the sound, giving you a second and sometimes third shot before full scatter. On properties with wide shooting lanes over 100 yards long, roughly the length of a standard football field, this sequencing can double or triple your per-night kill count. Trick 10. Pattern mature boars by moon phase. Mature solo boars, the ones over 3 years old and 250 pounds or more, are the hardest animals on the property to kill consistently. They travel alone or in small bachelor groups, move exclusively at night on pressured properties, and visit bait sites on irregular rotation schedules. The one behavioral pattern that holds up on camera data across multiple properties is increased movement around the last quarter moon, when decreasing light levels in the late night hours reduce detection risk for large animals. A Gone thread from a hunter running Polk County, Florida properties documented this specifically over a 3-year observation period with camera timestamps, noting that his mature boar contacts clustered disproportionately around the last quarter phase across all 3 seasons. Trick 11. Use hog panels to redirect natural movement toward your shooting lane. A few T-posts and wire panels positioned perpendicular to a known travel corridor will funnel hogs toward a gap you control without any baiting or disturbance of the corridor itself. The hogs follow the path of least resistance. A panel angled 45 degrees across their normal route pushes them along the panel toward the gap, which you position to give you a clean crosswind or slightly quartering shot. On properties where terrain does not provide natural pinch points, panels create artificial ones. Trick 12. Hunt the downwind edge of a fresh wallow. Wet mud scent, which is a combination of mineralized soil compounds and water, projects on the wind and masks a significant portion of human scent through olfactory competition. A hunter, positioned downwind of an active wallow, where the mud scent is moving toward approaching animals rather than human scent, has a measurable concealment advantage compared to standard cover scent products. This is not fully masking your scent, it is competing with it, and on calm mornings with stable thermals, the competition is enough to tighten approach distances significantly. Trick 13. Run 2 feeders 300 yards apart on pressured properties to split sounder behavior. A sounder that has been educated to treat a single feeder as a high-risk location will sometimes maintain activity at a second feeder on the same property, because the 2 locations have independent threat histories. The second feeder is not safer, because it is newer. It is safer because the specific combination of scent, sound, and visual disturbance that the sounder associates with danger at feeder 1 has not been replicated at feeder 2 yet. Distance matters here. 300 yards, roughly 3 football fields end to end, provides enough spatial separation that the 2 locations are processed as independent feeding sites rather than as variations of the same area. If you are getting value from this, hit subscribe. More of these coming. Trick 14. Drag carpet soaked in hog urine from your vehicle to your stand along your approach route. Boot scent on an approach trail is the most common reason sounder behavior at a feeder compresses toward fully nocturnal. The drag eliminates the boot scent signature along the route and replaces it with a scent hogs associate with other hogs rather than with humans. Hog urine is available commercially or can be collected from processed animals. The carpet drag takes about 30 seconds to rig, and the behavioral difference on camera is observable within the first week. Trick 15. Glass open hayfields and pastures from 400 yards or more at first light before you move in. At 400 yards, roughly the distance from home plate to the warning track in a major league outfield, a group of hogs is visible as dark shapes against the lighter colored ground before they bed. Walking directly to a feeder or hunting area without glassing the open ground first has cost me more opportunity than almost any other mistake I can name. Spot them at distance, plan a stalk that keeps wind and terrain in your favor, and close the distance on your terms rather than walking into a situation blind. Trick 16. Shift your setups to persimmon and softmass tree areas in October. When persimmons, crabapples, and wild plums drop in fall, hogs abandon corn feeders for fresh fruit, with the same abruptness that whitetails abandon summer food plots for acorn flats. A feeder that was producing nightly activity in September may go dark in October because the sounder has found a better food source 40 yards into the timber. Walk your property in early October and find the fruit drop before you spend a season wondering why your feeders went cold. Trick 17. Use a suppressed rifle for night hunting. Where legal, the noise reduction from a suppressor does not make the shot silent. It reduces the shot report from approximately 160 decibels to around 130 decibels, which is still loud but does not carry the same distance or produce the same frequency signature that full-power unsuppressed shots do. The practical result is reduced sounder scatter after the first shot. Unsuppressed shots on a tight sounder produce full scatter in 2 to 3 seconds. With a suppressed rifle on my Beauregard Parish, Louisiana property, I consistently get a second shot inside 5 seconds because the sounder's flight response is delayed. On a property where you need to manage numbers, that difference compounds over a season. Trick 18. Trim shooting lanes with a pole saw, extended from a distance rather than walking directly under your stand. Every time you trim branches or move brush within 15 yards of your stand, which is roughly the distance across 3 parking spaces, you deposit scent and disturbance sign at the exact spot you need to be clean. A pole saw with an 8 to 10 foot extension lets you clear lanes while standing back at less scent-critical distances. Same reason you should not trim on the day of the hunt or the day before. Trick 19. Hunt the downwind corner of any fenced pasture or field. Hogs follow fence lines as travel corridors because fences provide a navigational reference and often have brush growth along the base that offers cover. Where 2 fence lines meet at a corner, hogs coming from 2 different directions converge at the same point. Positioning a stand or blind on the downwind side of an active pasture corner, at a distance of 20 to 30 yards, roughly the length of a standard school bus, from the corner itself, puts you over a convergence point without requiring bait or feeder setup. Trick 20. Glass for dark shapes against tan grass from elevated vantage points at dusk. A mature boar or sounder in a late evening pasture is visible at 600 yards, roughly the length of 6 football fields end to end, as a dark blot against dried summer grass. This is the same spotting technique used for glassing elk and mule deer in western terrain, and it transfers directly to open terrain hog hunting in the south, particularly in the Texas Hill Country, coastal grass flats, and the open pasture systems of central Florida. You do not need a feeder to find hogs if you can see them. Trick 21. Position your stand 20 to 25 yards off the feeder perimeter rather than directly over the corn. Hogs that are cautious about a feeder location will hang up at the brush edge, which is typically 15 to 30 yards from the corn, and scent check before committing. If your stand is directly over the feeder, those hang-up animals are behind you or to your flank and never present a clean shot. Set back 25 yards in the direction the sounder approaches from, and your stand position covers both the approach and the feeder, giving you shots on animals before they fully commit and on animals at the corn. Trick 22. Target the 3 days following a new moon in summer. Hog feeding activity is lower during the darkest nights of the lunar cycle on unpressured properties because low light reduces the distance at which they can detect approaching predators, which triggers defensive behavior. After several nights of reduced activity, animals compensate with increased feeding urgency in the days following the dark period. Summer new moon recovery periods produce higher than average daylight feeding activity on the 2 to 3 days after the darkest nights, as the sounder catches up on caloric deficit. Trick 23. Run a drip feeder rather than a spinner. A spinner releases corn in one burst that is consumed in minutes. A drip feeder releases a slow, continuous trickle over 2 to 4 hours, keeping the scent column from the corn actively projecting into the air for the entire duration and keeping the hogs working the ground at the site rather than eating and leaving. The dwell time difference is significant. On a spinner setup, my cameras show the sounder arriving, feeding, and departing in an average of 8 minutes. On a drip setup at a comparable location, the same sounder stayed on site for 35 to 45 minutes on average. That extended window is additional shot time. Trick 24. Pull your feeder completely for 5 days, then reset. On properties where feeders have been running for multiple seasons and sounder activity has compressed toward exclusively nocturnal timing, a 5-day complete shutdown creates urgency that overrides the established threat assessment pattern. When corn reappears after an absence, pressure-educated animals approach with higher behavioral drive and lower caution because their internal caloric pressure has been building for 5 days. The first 2 nights after a restock on a long-running feeder that has been dark for 5 days typically produce the best activity of the season on that site. Same principle as the pre-hunt reduced load protocol, just applied as an emergency reset rather than a scheduled preparation. Trick 25. Ambush mature boars on leeward ridge slopes at first light. Mature solo boars bed on the downwind side of terrain features, specifically on ridge slopes where they can smell anything approaching from below while having a clear escape route above. A hunter approaching a leeward slope from the opposite ridge before first light, moving into position before the boar has settled into his bed, can intercept the animal on his approach route to the bedding area. This is spot and stalk hog hunting rather than bait and wait, and on properties where mature boars have learned to avoid every feeder, it is often the only method that produces consistent results. Trick 26. Use a climbing stick system to reposition mid-hunt when wind shifts. Fixed stands are your best tool in stable conditions. In conditions where thermals or wind direction shift significantly during a sit, a lightweight climbing stick system that lets you move to a different tree within 20 minutes can salvage a compromised sit rather than writing off the evening. Hog hunting conditions change faster than deer hunting conditions because hogs cover more ground and the relevant wind direction changes as they approach from different angles. Mobile capability on hogs is underused. Trick 27. Hunt the terrain between 2 water sources in dry summer months. When rainfall is below normal and standing water is limited, hogs develop tight rotation patterns between reliable water points. The travel corridor between 2 ponds, stock tanks, or creek pools becomes a predictable movement route that can be hunted without any bait by positioning on the trail between them. The schedule is reliable because water need in summer heat is not optional behavior. A sounder that uses 2 water sources 300 yards apart, roughly the distance between 3 football end zones, will cross the midpoint of that corridor on a schedule tight enough to hunt. Trick 28. Drag fresh liver or gut contents from a recently killed deer across your approach trail at a 45-degree angle. The organic attractant scent from fresh deer gut content is something hogs investigate aggressively because it signals an available meat and organ food source. The drag also masks boot scent through scent competition. This is a specialized version of the approach trail scent management principle, and it adds an attractant layer on top of the cover function. My wife's opinion of the practice when I described it is not printable, but the camera data from a Wilcox County, Alabama setup, where I ran this for 3 consecutive hunts, showed the sounder using my approach trail rather than avoiding it. Trick 29. Glass for turkey vultures, circling at altitude over unfamiliar terrain. Vultures locate wallows, carcasses, and concentrations of animal sign from the air before any ground observer can. On a new property where you do not yet know the hog travel pattern, circling vultures at altitude over a specific area are pointing at exactly the kind of wet, organic matter-rich terrain that hogs concentrate around. They are free aerial scouts, and experienced hog hunters on large, unfamiliar properties use them as first-pass scouting tools before investing any ground time. Trick 30. Position your setups at agricultural field corners where 2 crop types meet. Hogs work the edge where soybeans meet corn, or where a milo field meets a hay meadow, harder than any other part of those fields because the edge provides crop diversity, cover transition, and a quick retreat route in multiple directions. The corner is the highest density intersection of those edges. A stand or blind, positioned on the downwind corner of a multi-crop field, set back 40 to 50 yards into the adjacent timber, will consistently produce sounder contact without a feeder because the food and cover geometry does the work for you. Trick 31. Set your camera on the water source rather than the feeder during summer heat. Water patterns in summer are tighter and more predictable than food patterns because water need is driven by body temperature regulation, which operates on a more consistent biological clock than hunger. A hog that might visit a feeder at an unpredictable hour will visit a wallow or stock tank within a fairly narrow time window each day during extreme heat. Camera data from a water source will give you a reliable arrival window faster than camera data from a feeder on a pressured property. Trick 32. Use a handheld thermal monocular to scan the feeder area before committing to your approach. Walking in on a feeder that already has animals on it is one of the most common ways to blow a setup. A thermal scan from the property edge, before you begin your final 200 yards of approach, roughly the distance across 2 standard city blocks, confirms whether the site is occupied. The scan takes 90 seconds. Missing it and walking in on a feeding sounder costs you an entire evening and potentially several days of site recovery. Trick 33. Return to the same location on consecutive nights after a kill. Surviving sounder members return to their last known food source within 48 to 72 hours after a shooting event, driven by caloric need and by the established behavioral pattern of that location. A hunter who kills 3 animals from a sounder on Monday, then stays out of the area Tuesday and returns Wednesday evening, will often find remaining members of the same sounder back at the feeder or rooting site. The return timing is not random. It follows the same general circuit the sounder was running before the shoot. The camera data from a Fayette County, Texas property I run confirms this pattern across 5 consecutive seasons. Sounder remnants returned within 48 hours after a shoot event on 19 of 23 documented occasions. The thread connecting all 33 of these is a principle that took me most of my first decade of hog hunting to fully absorb. Every decision a sounder makes about whether to approach, commit to, or retreat from a location runs through the dominant sow's threat assessment. She is processing scent, sound, timing, visual information, and the memory of previous events at that specific location in real time. Each trick on this list either reduces the amount of threat information she has available, creates a behavioral pull strong enough to override her assessment, or intercepts the sounder at a point where she has not yet had time to complete the assessment. None of these tricks work perfectly every time. Hog hunting does not work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either hunting very low-pressure, unpressured ground or has a selective memory. The 5 highest impact tricks on this list, based on consistent results across multiple properties and multiple seasons, are Trick 4, Trick 7, Trick 9, Trick 14, and Trick 33. Feeder placement inside cover, approach trail camera placement, shooting sequence within the sounder, boot scent management on the approach, and post-kill return hunting. Address those 5 first. The other 28 are refinements on top of a foundation that those 5 build. A bow sight thread from a few years back on hog hunting with archery equipment touched on tricks 5, 9, and 18 from an archery-specific perspective. The grunt stop and the shooting lane management discussion in that thread are worth finding if you hunt hogs with a bow, because the approach distances and timing considerations are tighter, and the 33 tricks apply with additional weight when your effective range is 40 yards instead of 200. The compound curve difference between bow and rifle does not change the behavioral principles. The hog's nose works the same regardless of what you are shooting. The 33 tricks cost nothing to implement beyond what you are already spending on corn, feeders, and time in the field. The ones that produce the fastest visible result in camera data are Trick 4, Trick 13, Trick 24, and Trick 31. Feeder placement, second feeder, 5-day shutdown reset, and water source camera. Run those 4 changes first and let the cameras tell you whether they are working before you spend time on the more specialized tricks further down the list. The cameras don't lie. Your first interpretation of the data sometimes does, but the data itself is reliable. Trust it.